Hey guys, so I'm going to show you today how to do a straight seam sewn at a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the sewing machine and do a top stitch and a double top stitch. So we've got a couple of things to do. So I've got my sewing machine set up, plugged in, the light is on so you can see. I'm going to have to turn it off if we get too much of a glare. And then I've got a little tabletop ironing board, which is really convenient. And my iron is over here on, warming up on the highest cotton setting, ready to go. I've got some scissors. I always have some kind of scissors when I'm sewing. I've got thread. I already have a wound bobbin, so I'm good to go. And I've got my presser foot and needle ready to go. So I can start setting up my machine. So I'll go ahead and put my presser foot on there. I'll spin this wheel to turn the dial and raise the arm so that I can put my needle in. And again, I'm putting that with the flat side towards the back. I've got a little groove in the front that I can actually feel with my fingernail. I can actually slide my fingernail into the groove, but I can see the hole, and I'm gonna thread it front to back. I've got a drop-in bobbin on this machine, so it doesn't have a bobbin case, so I'm just gonna drop my bobbin in, following the instructions here, following that diagram exactly, and sort of pull it back to the side, and then I'm gonna thread my machine, following the instructions there. Pull it down. Got to pull this up, so I'm turning this arm towards me, see, so that I can get it. Pulling that down. I've got a thread guide right here, and I've got another thread guide right at the top of the needle, if you can see here. Again, I'm going to probably turn the light on and off if I decide it's going to give us too much of a glare to see. Sometimes it'll help and sometimes it might be a deterrent. So I'll go ahead and snip my thread really close to the edge so I can thread my needle, hopefully without much trouble. There we go. Got my needle threaded, and I'm going to push that through the little hole in the presser foot and just pull it towards the back, okay? I'm gonna pick up my bobbin thread by holding on to this just to have a little bit of tension. I walk the dial towards me, and there we go. You saw that, it just popped this thread right up. So now I've got thread coming out of the bottom, thread coming out of the top. They both feel nice. They're not stuck. There's a nice loose tension. Okay, so I'll slide those towards the back. My machine's now ready to go. I've also got a ruler on hand because now I'm going to get some muslin so we can do our first seam. So I'm gonna want some muslin. I've got some muslin here. I'm gonna cut it. I'm gonna want it to still be 10 inches high, so that it's going to be the same size as our other samples. So I can go ahead and pull, I can mark 10 inches and then I can pull to get a long 10-inch strip. So I'm going to find the 10 on my ruler, if you could see that right there. And then I'm going to snip. And I'm just going to pull this. So I'll get a nice long 10-inch strip, and I can save this and actually use it for all my samples because they'll all be 10 inches long. So now I've got a long strip, okay? And then in the other direction, I'm going to need 2 pieces to sew together. I want it to equal 8 inches across, so it's the same size as our other samples. But we've also got to add what's called seam allowance. So the bit of fabric that's going to go on the inside that you won't see, but it's how we can sew it together so we're not sewing it right at the seam so it'll just unravel. So we're going to add a 1/2 inch on each side to get that. So what I want is a piece that's 4.5 inches, and then another piece that's 4.5 inches. And when I sew them both together at that 1/2 inch seam allowance, they're going to be now 4 and 4, they're going to equal 8 inches across. You'll see what I mean, I guess, if you're not following. So I am just marking this 4.5 inches. So what it looks like is a strip like this. This is 4.5 inches wide by 10 inches long. And I'll make myself one more. So now I'm just coming over 4.5 inches and see how I'm using my ruler. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. You are not eyeballing this, you're going for absolute precision. Okay, so I give it a little slice and I can pull that and I've got my other strip. So I've got two kind of wrinkly strips now, right? So the very first thing I'm gonna wanna do is come over to my iron and iron these nice and flat. And when I iron, I usually iron from both sides. Hit it from one side, flip it over, and hit it from the other. You can pull off the little threads that are kind of dangling there. You can hear the steam is automatically starting to come out. The steam is what's really going to help with this. Whew. This one I'm going to block it. Remember how we kind of pull on both corners? Because it was looking a little twisted, because basically what I did here is I left the selvage edge. So it kind of gave me some twist that I didn't want. But I've pressed both of these and let them kind of cool just 1 second. And now I'm ready to sew them together. So I'm just pulling any stray threads that are just kind of dangling in the way. And what I'm going to do is put these right on top of each other, okay? So I've got one and I've got the other. I'm going to line them up, and you can sort of pick a side. They're identical right now, so we don't have to stress it, but just pick one side that I'm matching up identically. Okay, so I'm matching it up perfectly to make sure that I'm going to sew on this side. And this is where I can actually get some pins. I've got my little tomato full of pins, and I can pin these two pieces together, okay, so that I can sew them. When you pin to sew something, you pin it, you place the pin in the opposite direction of the seam that you're going to be sewing. So I'll kind of tell you what I mean. So I'm going to sew long. I'm going to sew a stitch that goes stitch, 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 stitch this way, okay? So I don't want to put a pin in the same direction that I'm about to sew. It'll make it more difficult for me to pull it out as I go. So I'm going to pin it perpendicular, the opposite of the way that I'd be sewing. And I mean, this is holding together on its own. I mean, look, it's holding together. So I really don't need that many pins, but you could put more in. So I'm going to probably put one at the end, one in the middle, and in this case, one at the other end. But this is just going to make sure that while I sew, these two pieces that are perfectly lined up don't move at all. And I'm not going to sew over the pins. That has a tendency to break the needle. If your needle comes down right on top of that pin, it's going to break, and then you'll have to rethread it. You'll have to get another needle. It'll be annoying. Sometimes it messes up your fabric. You don't want that to happen. So get in the habit of pulling out the pins as you sew. And again, if I'm sewing this direction, I can just pull right before I get there, pull it out to the side, okay? So I'm going to sew this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And what that means, so I can take my ruler and show you, a 1/2 inch from the edge, which is there, okay? Each of the squares on this ruler are 1 inch, so a 1/2 inch is right there. this is where my line's gonna be. I don't have to draw that out on the fabric because I've got guidelines on the sewing machine that are gonna show me exactly where that 1/2 inch is. So what I'm gonna do is line this up at the 4/8 mark. Let me see exactly where that is. So it looks like with this one, the 4/8 is this line right down here, okay? I can see that. If you're ever not sure, or sometimes you even get to a sewing machine that doesn't have it labeled, I can literally take my ruler and put the presser foot down. I could even put the needle almost through it right there, and I can measure a 1/2 inch over from where that needle hits, which in this case is right here on this machine. It's funny, I can actually see that somebody drew a line and you can do that too. You can draw a dark line, you can put a piece of tape there, whatever you need to do to remember. 1/2 inch is the typical spot where we're gonna sew. It's the most common seam allowance. So that's what we're gonna sew most of our seams at, is a 1/2 inch. So what I'm gonna do is line this up very close to the edge. Again, hopefully you can see. It might be easier if I turn the light off. I'm about 1/4 inch from the edge, from this edge, like 1/4 inch in. So I'm not trying to, you know, sew right on that edge. Just like when we hand sewed, I kind of come up just a little bit, a 1/16 to 1/4 inch. And that's where I'm kind of imagining that I'm going to drop my needle, okay? And again, I'm gonna hold on to these 2 pieces of thread as I sew, and I'm gonna walk that first stitch. So I come over here to the wheel and I hand walk towards me, and now the needle is in there. My needle's in, my presser foot's down. This piece of fabric isn't going anywhere. Put my presser foot back down, and I usually walk that first stitch. So I just walk towards me. See how I did that? I've already sewn the first stitch, okay? I could sit here and walk the entire thing. See how I'm just pushing it towards me. You can see here, I'm about to hit my pin. I don't know if you can see with the light better on or off. So I'm gonna pick up my presser foot and just pull that pin right out to the side. And I can put it back in my little tomato. I usually have this like off to the side so that I can be saving those, okay? So presser foot goes back down. And again, I'm just hand walking it. If you're unsure about getting a really straight line, there is no shame in doing it this way. Hand walk, okay? And then if I felt comfortable, I can go ahead and start using the foot pedal. I've got the needle down, so I'm gonna pick my presser foot up just to show you. There's my seam. You can see my nice, pretty, perfectly straight seam a 1/2 inch from the edge, okay? So presser foot back down, just like I didn't stop at all. I'll walk another 1 or 2, and now I can try to start using the foot pedal. Let's see. Oh, I've got to turn it on, so I have to I have to turn the machine on to use the electricity. Okay, and I sewed a little bit, and I'm gonna put the needle down because as I notice now, I'm getting close to another pin. So I'm gonna needle down, presser foot up, and then I pick the pin up. If your needle's up and you pick your presser foot up, your fabric's gonna move. It's gonna move right out of the way. It's gonna mess up your seam. So make sure anytime that foot comes up that your needle is down. So I can put presser foot back down and I can sew the rest of the way. I'm not pushing this, I'm not pulling it, I'm just guiding it in the right direction. I'm just making sure I follow that 1/2 inch line. Oh, gotta turn it back on, and I'll use the foot pedal. Try to go nice and slow and even and steady, and use this as practice. And again, I'm getting close to the pin, so presser foot, or sorry, needle goes down, I walked it down, presser foot comes up, and then I can pull that pin right out to the side, and I can finish my stitch. I want to go right off the edge, okay? I don't want to go so fast that I go off the edge for like, you know, another 30 seconds, but I'm just gonna go right off the edge. I'll show you. So turn the machine back on. Ooh, there we go. It kind of got away from me for a second. So I've gone off the edge. I can tell what I'm gonna do is raise my foot If ever you go to pull this and it feels like kind of tight, it's probably still caught in a half stitch. So come up here to your wheel, just walk it a little towards you, and then you'll notice it pulls very smoothly, and you've got your 2 stitches here. I can cut this on the side of the machine or use my scissors, and I want to make sure I leave a little bit. I don't want to cut so close to the edge that it's going to unravel, so I'll leave like an inch or 2. So there we go. I've cut that, and now I have my 1/2 inch seam. And what I mean by that is, see, I've sewn the 2 pieces together in this long direction and is a 1/2 inch from the edge. I can now open it up and I've got a seam. This would be what you would see on the outside. It looks beautiful, right? You don't see any stitch. You can pull it and you kind of see the puckers, right? But it looks even, nice, pretty. If this was in a matching thread, I wouldn't even see that, but because I did it in black on purpose so we can see it, you can see it just a little bit. So this is a seam that I sewed at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So for our first, I'm gonna just clip the other side at about 1 inch or 2 inches from the edge. I'm not going to stress these. I'm going to leave them open only because these are samples that we're sewing so that we can see what we did, okay? So don't worry about tying these off or worrying about the edge. Just leave 1 inch or 2 so that you can see what we did. Now I'm going to press this to prep it for the actual finish that we're going to do on this stitch. So we just sewed a seam, right? But we want to do different edge finishes, meaning I've got this in the back, right? This would be the inside, and I've got fray. You know, if this was the inside of my garment, it looks okay, but it's not great because I can kind of see the fray, and this would be flopping around. I want to do different edge seam finishes that make this more like a finished piece that I would buy in a store. It looks really good from this side, but I want it to look good from this side too. So the first one we're going to do is called a top stitch, and what this means is that you're going to sew another stitch on top of your fabric. It's often used in like denim, right? You'll see it on the outside of your jeans. They usually do a contrast color. Say this was blue, the top stitch might be yellow or orange. You always see that. It's going to make it stronger because it means this stitch would have to rip out and this stitch before the seam actually opened up and fell apart. So it makes it really strong. It's also decorative. You can do a different color, a contrast color, and almost show off your stitch. So there's a lot of reasons to do a top stitch. But the other thing it's going to do is hold down my floppy seam allowance so that it looks a little nicer from the inside. So with the top stitch, we're going to press all of our seam allowance, which is this, press it to one side. So pick either one. Mine's already kind of naturally going to this side, so I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to press it all to this side. So I come over to my iron, and the first thing I do is press it from behind, okay, from the back side. And I'm just going to press that to the side, which it's already going. And what I make sure to do as I'm pressing is I'm kind of pulling with my hand. What I don't want to do is press it and have like a fold on the top, you know? I don't want to have extra fabric folded up here. I want to kind of pull so that I'm getting the most fabric, right? It's almost taut. I'll say that a lot. I kind of want to see that pucker. So I really want to kind of pull on it a little bit as I'm ironing. And often what I'll do is just do this with my hands, kind of pulling it with my fingers as I iron. So again, I iron that from the back, and this is the way I always do. Flip it around to the front, and that's how I can double check that I don't have any folds that I don't want on the front. So now I'm gonna hit it from the front. This is my good side, this is my pretty side. So I always do that one last to really make sure that it's still gonna look pretty. It's nice and crisp, it's nice and taut. I've kind of stretched as I've been pressing, and you can see it looks so crisp. I mean, that is a seam. It's like literally crispy. The muslin is making it very crisp. Okay, so now I'm gonna sew my top stitch, and I'm gonna sew on the top of the fabric, right? Just like the name implies, on the top, and I'm gonna sew at 1/4 of an inch from this seam that I sewed, okay? So in this case, I'm gonna go through 1, 3 layers of fabric, because remember I've got my 2 layers in the seam allowance and the top. I'm going to go through all the layers of fabric a 1/4 inch from here. So let me set my machine up, pull the thread towards the back, and I'm going to set this up like this. Here, let me make sure you can see. Okay, so I'm going to sew in this direction on top of all the layers. Set that presser foot down. Again, I'm about, a 1/4 inch from the very edge. I'm going to hold on to my thread for that first stitch, and when I'm setting it up, I am using the side of my presser foot to mark my 1/4 inch. Okay, I could get my ruler back out and I could show you. A 1/4 inch is, okay, so this is 1 inch, this is a 1/2 inch, this one is a 1/4 inch. I could check this and make sure, but basically right along that edge is going to be 1/4 inch from the needle. So whenever I sew a 1/4 inch, I am just taking my presser foot and I'm using that as my guide. You'll see what I mean when I start sewing. So I'm holding on to this. I'm going to start my first 1 or 2 stitches. Now I can let go. I'll turn this off, maybe it's easier. Oh wait, no, I've got to do it so I can sew. And now I'm going to sew, just guiding my presser foot. You can pull this back so it doesn't have such a glare. There we go, guiding my presser foot right along this seam, okay? Just slow and steady. With a top stitch, it's a decorative stitch and you see it very much on the top of your seams. So you don't want to mess up. It would be very obvious. It would take your good work and it would make it very obvious that you weren't doing it correctly if you did a crooked top stitch. So let's see, my needle's up. I'm going to pull. That came nice and smoothly. Pull that and you can see what I've done. I have sewn a 1/4 inch from this seam all the way down. A nice, even, straight, pretty top stitch. On the back, if you can see, it has captured some of this fray and it's pressed it down. Now there's still a little bit of fray, about a 1/4 inch of fray since we've come over a 1/4 inch, so there's another 1/4 inch sitting here, but it's a lot neater. It looks a lot nicer from the inside and outside. I can trim my end thread to about 1 inch, right? And then I'll press this again. Seems like overkill, but it is not. I'll press it from the front. I really want to make sure it's nice and crisp and looks good. And now this is my beautiful top stitch, and this is what I want from you, okay? Looks just like this. This is the front. This is the back, right? This would be the inside that nobody would see, and this is the outside. Looks really nice. And now I can set up for our double top stitch.